Hello. We'll get it. Can you thumbs up? You can hear us now? Oh, good. Wonderful. Thanks for the patience on that. I believe we've got Courtney and Joni is on here. What about Jason?
Jason is
Not Jason yet.
Where's Joni? She's on audio.
Oh, we got Joni on audio. Senator Den Hartog, thank you for joining us. You may have to kick it off and double team for Representative Horman until she's on. We have you guys up first, but we'll see what this looks like and we can come back to whatever at any point.
Superintendent, I don't know that Wendy will be joining. She was going to try. She's camping with family and she texted this morning. She hardly has any internet service.
Gotcha. Well, and she should do that with her family. So good for her. All right. Well, with that, as we have a work session, we're not going to officially adopt an agenda. We'll follow what's been posted, however. And we talked a lot last time about the intent of the legislation, and a great suggestion was made that we invite the lawmakers who were at the table when this was created. And so Senator Den Hartog, thank you for cutting some time out of your day. We'll just give you a quick summary of where we are. We've had 2 meetings with the full panel. The group decided that having a work session to work through a couple of things would be valuable as we look at refining recommendations and having them ready for the State Board of Education meeting in October. And so with that, one of the topics that we spent quite a bit of time talking about was on eligible expenses, and that looked and sounded a bunch of different ways and offshoots of those, as you can imagine. And we're very interested and curious for you as you were considering this shift from strong families, strong students to empowering parents, some differences, maybe some similarities, where you were coming with that. And so we'll turn it over to you and kind of guide us through that.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to give you our perspective. Thank you so much for inviting both Representative Horman and myself. A special thank you to the parents who are a part of this. You are part of our vision come to life. So we're really thankful and appreciative for the time that you're spending discussing this and answering some questions. So really, obviously, there was so much happening in the pandemic, and the big push with strong families, strong students was just to make sure kids had what they needed when everyone was kind of forced to learn at home or learn in a hybrid setting. And that was, with those federal funds, really flexible, and that was heavy on hardware, so on computers and books and physical things like maybe desks, and there were just so many things that were those upfront costs that parents weren't anticipating but were needing to make sure that their kids were set up to do well in their new learning environments at home again or in a hybrid setting. So as we looked to codify it moving forward with empowering parents, really the recognition of a lot of different things that have happened in our state along the way. The Learn Everywhere bill, and we can pull up the number and get that for you. But that was a concept that you could get credit for school for things that happen outside of the school day. So empowering parents, part of those weren't directly connected. That was something that Representative Horman had worked on with Senator Thane, but they were something that we saw as being able to work in conjunction. So this idea that, again, that learning happens in all kinds of places in all kinds of ways. So you could get credit for your 4-H class. What we had envisioned was something that was really flexible, and maybe what has caused you some frustration and maybe has caused the state board and our vendor some frustration as well is the open-endedness of some of those categories. But the reason for that was we didn't know all of the ways that parents might want to use the funds to help their students. And so we didn't want it to be overly restrictive in terms of we just didn't know all of the needs and all of the creative ways. Again, this was a lesson learned from the pandemic, all of the creative ways that people might try to access educational opportunities for their kids. So that's why there's such an open-ended nature. And I know I've read a little bit about some of the work that you guys have done. And I know there's probably been a lot of questions around, particular expenses. And another component was we really envisioned, and I don't think this has, and this someone from the state board can correct me, and I don't think this has happened quite yet, but if there were extra opportunities that school districts were providing, we really envisioned both individual teachers being able to be service providers on the platform. So if they were going to provide tutoring, outside the school day for some extra money and or for students that they knew needed or wanted some additional support. We pictured school districts being vendors on the platform. So if there were expenses associated that were not, that were extra items, whether that was, school fees or uniform fees, or, whether that was for sports or for, anything that a parent is saying, I want to access this for my kid, but I don't know how to pay for it. And I know that sounds really broad and scary. And maybe some of the examples that we've seen have been like, ooh, no, maybe we weren't quite thinking that. But again, it's the statute itself obviously is set in place, but we envision being able to come back at a future legislative session and, tailoring and giving some more parameters around that, but you as parents being able to kind of help filter up to us, like, okay, what types of requests are coming in that aren't getting approved? And this is something folks at the state board, we haven't really talked about this yet, but maybe something we need to talk about with the vendors, saying, is there a way to capture things that people are applying for but are getting denied, but that we might be interested in saying, yeah, really that should be an eligible expense. Not dissimilar to 529 plans, if you guys are familiar with those, for college expenses. Those can be used for K-12 tuition, but in the college space, it's really broad. So you can use it for tuition, you can use it for room and board, you can even buy groceries with it. Like the 529 plans, like if you've saved for college or you've had people help contribute to saving for college for your student, the use of those funds is really broad. And in a similar way, albeit much, much smaller in terms of the amount of money or the vision of it, that was part of our vision for empowering parents as well. So I'm happy to answer direct questions. And I know you guys have had some interesting scenarios and some interesting things that you've talked about, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. I'm confident that we have questions. And so I'll start. Well, I guess I'll ask if you're online, if you'll use the raised hand emoji, that'll help us. No, Amy is in the room, just for those that are on the computer. Questions for the senator? I can think of 2 or 3 myself, so I'm sure you've got have a bundle. Amy, you want to start?
I do. I have a couple for you. I'm curious. This really helps. Thank you so much for giving us some of those ideas of what your parameters of what you were looking at. I appreciate that. I do have some questions. So my kids go to a homeschool co-op. And so I have some examples. And those are like 501c3s. They have to file, they file with the state. And so after talking with Odyssey, the contractor, I know that they would need to file with the contractor as a vendor.
Yep.
I don't know right now under the legislation that that's something that could happen, or if it could be expanded so that the legislation could be expanded so that could happen. So I guess that's my question, because for example, I know my daughter going into 9th grade for one biology class, just to register and be in the class for one semester, it's a $320 fee.
Yep.
And then there's a material fee, and I don't know yet what that is for the semester. And then there's a book fee on top of that for the semester. So I'm planning that it'll probably be a $500 to $600 semester fee just for the one course. And so I'm just curious if that's something that you're looking into. Is that a possibility? Something that
Yeah, and maybe this is where the state board can jump in. In my recollection, and I apologize, I don't have the statute pulled up in front of me. I don't believe we had much in the way of parameters around who could or couldn't be a vendor. But the scenario you're describing is exactly something that we would envision those funds could be spent for. It would take some work from, and this is where that conversation between parents wanting to access the funds and who they're needing to expend the funds through. So that homeschool co-op. So like your communication as a parent to the homeschool co-op saying, I can pay you using these funds, but I need you to take some additional steps to get approved as a vendor. But in my mind, and I'm happy to speak for Representative Foreman on that scenario is exactly something that we would envision. And then we had the statistics, strong families, strong students. My recollection is, I think it was almost 93 or 94% of the students who access those funds were public school students. And then the other were private and homeschool students. But again, we believe one of the beauties in the design of both the original Strong Families, Strong Students and Empowering Parents is that it doesn't matter where the student is or where they're accessing their education, they have access to these funds, albeit limited.
So before I get to Holly, I guess I have a follow-up. Amy shared a very specific example of tuition associated with a homeschooling program. I guess the question that I would follow up or add to that, was there a lane for other types of private tuition or free fees? Was that discussed or envisioned?
Well, specifically when the program was in for tuition for private school, it is not an allowable expense under the program. A private school student could access the funds to pay other fees, just not tuition. So depending on how you would classify, a homeschool co-op and, the cost for a course, if you look at it as the same way we pay, dual credits, I don't see any difference in that. And money is fungible, right? So, but if a private school would break out their fees to say, it was this sports fee, and so a private school could be a vendor. You could have a teacher at a private school also be a vendor. It wasn't that a private school couldn't be a vendor. It was just that you couldn't pay for the tuition portion of those costs.
But fees, as you've just described, at least at the creation, what was a part of how you saw this.
Yeah.
Okay. Holly, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. So just remembering that this system is built so that this is kind of a menu of pre-approved purchases for parents to really choose from, I view that as a way to prevent fraud. So was it your intention that this parent panel would be the decision makers in what expenses that were pre-approved, whether they fit that statute or not? And if it was or was not, what was your vision of the panel's involvement?
Yeah, certainly as it was envisioned, and this is one of those things in implementation that we learn along the way with a new program. I didn't envision, and Representative Foreman didn't either, that the parent panel would be doing a backwards look on things that had already been approved. That's supposed to be one of the built-in, safety is maybe the wrong word, but fraud prevention measures, like you mentioned. That is the beauty of the program. So if it's not meant to be a trap for parents to say, oh, you spent this money, now we're going to come claw it back because we decided you didn't spend it correctly. And that was one of the things with Strong Families, Strong Students. Parents, again, because it was early days of the pandemic, parents could expend funds and submit receipts and get reimbursement. if their costs were deemed to fit within the program. So this is saying we're not doing that. We're not having parents expend funds hoping to get reimbursed. It should be that any items on the platform, parents should feel confident that they can expend funds. I think maybe the portion that's missing, and maybe this is maybe a conversation with the vendor, the portion that's missing is the ability to capture something that's not on the list that parents are interested in. So, if there's a way for parents to say, oh, I went on there, I didn't see, I was hoping to use funds for, I'm drawing a blank at the moment, but pick your category, and they didn't see it on the list, but they're like, oh, it makes sense to me. I wish if there was a way to capture that information and then have that come to the parent panel to say, does this make sense as a collective group of parents as something that should be an eligible expense, not a look back for things that were already essentially pre-approved on the platform.
Right. So Senator, this has been, what you just discussed has been a big discussion point with the parent group on how to balance that, things that were denied. Would they be things now that we look at them that we would have denied, maybe not.
Yeah.
And then in order to have informed recommendations moving forward, we also recognize that parents may not have applied for something because they didn't see it as an available item. And so it's like, how do we gauge going forward, entirely knowing that a lot of decisions were made because here was what, and this is nothing against the vendor, but just what was available. Did we limit the creativity and decision-making of families because we weren't able to anticipate every single thing? And so that's where the panel is in this place, and this is why you having this discussion with us is so helpful, because then we know how to kind of bridge. How much do we look back? We look back just enough to know how to go forward, but we recognize that there are needs for changes going forward.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's the component I would say that we hadn't, and I'm certain wasn't part of the RFP process, but now as we're talking about it, would make sense to say, vendor, could you design the platform to say, if you don't see, the thing that you're looking for, the item that you're looking for on this pre-approved list, essentially an online suggestion box or something to be able to capture it, or give parents the idea that, maybe it could be an eligible expense in the future. But I certainly don't want and we still, there's two separate things going on. Like there's and Matt, you can correct me, but the state board's responsibility for fraud prevention and protection. And if we need as a state to go and say that shouldn't have been approved. And that's where, again, the statute can be beefed up to give more direction to the vendor on pre-approvals and to parents on like specific lists of things to vet out. But I do think we need a way to capture in a meaningful sense things that are not clear on the platform and get that into code so it's clear both for parents and for the vendor, but also as a way to capture what are those creative ways that we didn't think of within the broad categories. And that was really what we were hoping for the parent panel to vet was, okay, we didn't envision, again, pick your, dance lessons. We did envision dance lessons, but let's say we hadn't, but yes, that can be in that other category. So.
Thank you. Courtney. I think you were still on mute.
Yep. Thank you, Senator. So I'm just going to reiterate what I just heard. So one of your visions for this was really to support within the public school parameters opportunities to access academic support with COVID learning loss. And so currently right now, there are no school districts approved as vendors in the system, nor are there any public universities in the state of Idaho approved as vendors in the system. And as I've been doing research on COVID learning loss, one of the the best ways to overcome the lapses is direct instruction, tutoring opportunities, and things of that nature. And there are very limited, if not any, resources available throughout the majority of the state for direct services from providers to tutor and to help with that learning loss. So is that something that you think would be essential to really be authentic with the motivations of the bill, to have school districts all be pre-approved as vendors and have the university systems in the system?
I would love to see that. And I don't know if that's we missed a communication opportunity with districts. Maybe they saw it much more as an individual transactional thing and not as an opportunity. Because it's not that school districts aren't doing these things, right? They're already doing these things, but maybe some of them are doing, and again, I don't know, maybe some of them are thinking, oh, we could provide additional or make something available, but it's going to cost us more, or we've used our COVID relief funds to direct these things in the classroom in a smaller group setting. So again, more as an opportunity, both for addressing the learning loss issues and as we move forward, other opportunities that individual teachers or school districts may say, we could offer this as a unique thing within our district, but we're going to have to charge families, or families are like, oh, I can't access that unless, I have some funds to pay for it. So, whether that's an automatic, approve the districts, or whether it's, a communication attempt to say, hey, districts, if you're thinking about some of these things, please be a part of this.
I just, Courtney and Senator Matt Freeman let me know, and I'll share with everyone that Marsing School District, there is one school district that is approved. And so clearly there's work to do, but we just wanted to be sure that information was stated.
Just quickly, they have not been approved. This is Heather Zeitlin, the Empowering Parents Coordinator. They applied.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, and Matt, and
someone
maybe
in the hopper.
Yeah, maybe I can just chime in here. And this is where a lot of the questions have been coming from our office. Is the statute makes it clear that one line, it's the other educational, I'm sorry, educational programs offered for a fee, that whole call out in the statute. And we've been interpreting that as that it would be limiting on the school districts to participate in the program.
Well, it would be for the additional things that they may charge a fee for.
Okay. Because it's specific on there, it says provided that such students may not be counted for purposes of calculating public school enrollment.
Yes.
Okay, so if it's a fee that's like outside of the typical school day, or if it's, because you're saying like after school services, but then like lunch fees wouldn't be included.
Lunch fees was not one that had come up. I don't know. Yeah.
I think first, Jason, I think Barb had her hand, unless you had something specific to this.
I can speak to the Marsing of what we were talking about.
Yes, you sure can. Thank you. Jason, if that's okay, Barb, we'll have him come in front of you. Thank you.
So I went to our superintendent, Senator, this is Jason Seavey, board chair of Marsing School District.
Okay.
And I went to our superintendent and we developed a plan for co-curricular expenses, the pay to play, to try to develop that. And then if a teacher, because we're a 4-day school, if a teacher wanted to develop a tutoring on Fridays, they could raise extra money, and then it would be flow through money through the district. That's what our goal is.
Great.
Marsing.
Nice.
I think that's really cool.
Yeah. We'll share some of those ideas around the state, Jason. Those are fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you. Barb? And you're on mute.
Sorry.
It's all good.
I made it through COVID with only like one meeting, so bear with me. Senator, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. And thank you for, working with this program. I think it's great.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to circle back to something you said earlier. As you probably know, at our last meeting, we kind of got into the weeds a little bit about eligible and not eligible, and sports came up, and you mentioned earlier, you guys had anticipated dancing, that type of thing. I have noticed that since our last meeting, some of the discussion from parents on there's a Facebook group, some of that, and even some of the emails that came in, and then as well as some parents who've reached out to me since that last meeting and kind of talked about sports in general, because to me that seems like a pretty broad subject that can start becoming a slippery slope in terms, because one of the questions that was brought up by the board for eligible and ineligible purposes were things like uniforms and equipment and sports, and as we further discuss the eligible items, and what were you guys thinking? What was your intent when you guys were putting us through in terms of that? And I'm saying this knowing that, I definitely think physical education is important. I think a healthy body is a healthy mind, and that type of thing. So, but I did want to kind of see, because it is kind of something that has been brought up by parents. I'd love to know if it was something that you had discussed more about.
Sports fees and equipment and uniforms was something we talked about. And again, with the program being targeted, we know we eventually have opened up eligibility depending on the applicants. But if you have a student from a lower income family who can't participate in sports at a public school because of the fees, this seems to me, all of it is something that enhances someone's education. So whether that's sports at their local public school, that there's going to be a fee, or if they're part of something, an activity outside of school that's going to cost something. We envision that as something that would be an eligible expense. Now, maybe that's something you as parents collectively, or the parents that you're hearing from, like if that makes you bristle, like that's something I think we need to talk about. Is that what we would want all of the money spent on? No. I think really it is. It's an educational enhancement, right? Like the $1,500 isn't going to get you a full and complete education, or a full and complete, all the sports you want to do, all the costs, all the equipment, it's not going to get you everything. It's only going to help some people with some of the expenses.
Thank you.
Holly?
Thank you, Senator. I really appreciate the clarity that you're giving us. And I think in order for us to change gears and give the legislature what you guys need to sort of tailor the statute or beef it up like you were talking about, I think it'd be helpful for us to know what other things other than suggestions. There are a lot of parents that are talking about problems with vendors. Is it appropriate for us to give recommendations to you, or is it desired for us to give recommendations to you about how the program itself is working, or would you prefer that go to the state board?
I think the state board is the one managing the contract, but I think the parent panel is perhaps in a unique middleman position. I don't expect you to vet issues with the vendor, but you're in a unique position to share what you're hearing. You're not only have your own experiences, but to share what you're hearing from other parents who have tried to use it, who've had difficulties, or, something didn't make sense. We want it to be something that's user friendly and easy to access so that it makes sense and parents want to come back and utilize the program in future years. Not that they're so frustrated and give up and we don't have the usage that we want out of the program. Because again, at the end of the day, we want it to benefit kids. So if it's working smoothly, and that means, are there issues with parents getting approval? Are there issues with vendors getting approval? Like, I think the parent panel has a unique opportunity to be kind of a filter, but we don't expect you to solve all those problems if that makes sense. Maybe you just raise it up and say, this is a problem. This is what parents are frustrated with that maybe isn't working. This is what is what is working for them. It's kind of it is a unique role.
So helpful.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did that get everything? I didn't want to cut you off, Holly. Okay. Barb, before we go to you, I want to make sure we don't overlook Joni. And so, Joni, would you like to join in?
That the tuition sheet is not considering an allowable expense.
Oh,
That was just-
Joni, we're gonna adjust the volume on our end just real quick so we can hear. Okay. If you don't mind starting over, sorry.
Now? No?
We can hear you just very quietly.
Oh. My question is, you had mentioned that tuition was not an allowable expense. I was just wanting to hear your thoughts on that, on the reasoning.
Yes. So as it was drafted and as we had worked with people, that was one of the negotiations and frankly, one of the concessions that Representative Horman and I made. Would we like to see tuition as an allowable expense in the future? Personally, as the two legislators championing it, yes. Do we recognize that $1,500 doesn't pay a full tuition anywhere? Yes. So again, that's something that in that category of, is this something like, is that something parents want? Like, we're interested in that. I mean, we know what we're interested in, and whether or not we can legislatively get that through the process is still a question that's up in the air. But again, in the category of how do parents want to use the funds, we're interested if that's something that parents are interested in. Politically, I'm interested in that, but I'm being pretty frank and open with you. I don't know that that's something that can get through the legislature. So there are all things we want, but we still have to get through a process to get things changed in the statute.
Joni, did you have a follow-up to that?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. And just chime in. I don't want to miss you in this, and so let us know.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, Barb.
Hi, sorry, Megan.
You're good.
One of the other things I noticed going through the statute and going through the program that jumped out at me was the three tiers, the three waves, and the different AGIs. Did you guys ever discuss having a top level on the AGI, or was there anything? I guess that's my question. Was there any discussion about that? It was just a thought, because I think it was like 25% came through that third wave. So I was just wondering about that.
No, we never did discuss having a full cap. We did want the program, the way it's rolling out. And again, some of that is communication and making sure families know that they're eligible to apply. We did want to prioritize families with lower incomes, but we did want it to be eligible to all families. And so that was the intent of not having a top cap. Again, because it's about the individual students, and we may or may not know, all of a family's circumstances. So would I like to see it heavier on, that most of the students are from lower income households? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, if there's still funding, that was the purpose of having the waves.
Okay.
Senator, I'll just quickly mention that one of the conversations with this group has been some sort of a recommendation wherein you can move more quickly through the phases and have those phases line up with the start of school. Okay. Recognizing that when laws go on the books and things come into play, that may not be seamless and the great alignment with the start of the school year. But that has been some discussion on the actual management of the program from this group, just as a kind of a FYI. Matt Freeman. Sorry.
And I would just say, that's the type of thing, what makes it more functional for families to use. I would say that's the type of information and feedback we're interested in. Again, how are parents thinking about accessing? And we understand that government timelines and when things go into effect are not how many people may be living and orienting their lives.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to circle back to talk about the educational services offered by school districts. And Heather or Jen, feel free to jump in if you would like. But under the eligible expenses, it specifically says educational programs for a fee pursuant to a contract by a district or a charter school or CTE program to non-public school students. And so it is limited to non-public school students. And then there's also a statute on the books that already allows students who are non-public school students to be able to participate in either programs, courses, or extracurricular activities. So there's that.
So if a recommendation from this group, well, it sounds like there would have to be a specific recommendation. Well, and I guess, you know, the legislature can do what they want with the laws, but if this panel wanted any student to be able to access services of a public school district, that would call for some sort of a change.
You'd have to amend the statute.
Okay. On that, and that's good for us to know and understand.
Heather, did I miss anything?
No, that's what I was trying to get at
Okay.
prior. Like it's real, the statute has really bound us and allowing those school districts to come on to serve the children within this that are publicly funded. Yes, we can accommodate the ones that are like homeschool and they want to take the classes at the public school, but beyond that, it's just limiting the way it's written.
And I think that's the beauty of having some experience under our belt. You start a place and build it to what you think, you know, and then you can anticipate or contemplate every way that it will work. But for us to be in a good position now, we've got a little bit of data, we've got interest, you know, from parents and how it's working. So it's a good opportunity. Amy?
I was just gonna ask Matt, would you say that to us again, let's clarify that exactly for us again, please. I just wanna make sure I understand you completely.
Sure, yeah. So Idaho Code 331030 provides that the list of eligible products and services. So that specifically says that educational programs offered for a fee or pursuant to a contract by a school district, charter school, or CTE program to non-public students, provided that the students can't be counted for purposes of calculating enrollment. But it's limited to non-public school students.
Okay.
Is there a different category they can qualify under, Matt? I'll pull up the statute in a minute.
A public school student?
Yeah.
I read that and I pulled that up. In fact, I think I have it here, but I thought that was just being considered under enrollment and how they're being counted that the schools will pay. But I'm not, there's more to that.
I mean, how we've interpreted that is that a public school student wouldn't.
I am muted.
A public school student would not be able to use their Empowering Parents funds if there was a contract with another school district or charter school. And again, I have difficulty thinking of a scenario in which that would apply, but
Well, I think the example of in Marsing on their 4-day week, the teacher provided tutoring services and you are enrolled in Marsing School District. What I'm hearing you say is, as you read that student would not be able to use their funds to pay for a teacher in their district.
And if I could chime in as well, just to back Matt up here a little, this is Matthew Ryber from the governor's office, everybody that's lurking in the corner. I'm not a lawyer by any means at all, thankfully. But if I were reading it as a lawyer, I think Matt has the right interpretation on how the plain language of the text reads within the statute and how it's structured. So to Senator's point, maybe that's something we need to crack open and change if that's part of the intention. But certainly how the plain language of that text reads, I think we're reading that correctly. Once again, a little asterisk on that of not an official interpretation.
It's something that we could.
Yeah, we'll add that
easily amend.
to the list of things.
Thank
Holly.
you.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I feel like the work that the state board has given to us, or the information they've provided to us and what they've asked us to do, really, hearing what the senator just said, doesn't align with the purpose of the panel. And I think maybe it's not our job to interpret the statute, but really to make recommendations and share perspectives. And I feel like we haven't really had the opportunity to do that yet. So I'm wondering if we can restructure the rest of the meeting to try to move more toward sharing the feedback that we've heard from parents and those sorts of things, in order to get the senator and her colleagues in the legislature the feedback that they wanted from this panel.
Thank you, Holly. As far as the remainder of this meeting, we'll keep the work session as is to go through the things that were requested by the panel a few weeks ago, but we can absolutely create an agenda for our August meeting coming up here that gets into those things. And I think that that's where we're headed anyway. Our charge is to make recommendations to the State Board of Education. And I think, to the senator's point, we may not have every solution and know how to solve every situation, but we could, and I'm just, as an example, a recommendation could be to modify statute to include any student could access fees within a school district, or we would encourage a process that aligns with the school year. We don't have to get into the weeds of the implementation of what that looks like, but we can talk very generally when we get into, here we're going to talk about some of the categories. Maybe we want to just generally say we would recommend modifying categories to include tuition and fees. And then I believe that, and Senator, correct me where I'm wrong here, that would provide, well, one, the board something to go off of, and then also allows the legislature to do their work. Is that a fair look?
Yeah, I think that's a really fair look, and I wouldn't expect the parent group to craft legislation, or even, as the superintendent said, to really have the full solution, because maybe there's other things at play that not all of us know about. But I'd even be like both, like a list of recommendations and maybe a list of issues that you're like, we don't know how to have a recommendation on this, but we know as parents this is a problem. Like, I'm interested in that as well. Again, because we want it to function and we want it to make sense for parents who are trying to access these funds for their students. And I think that's, in my mind, that's the critical piece of the parent panel and the value that you bring to the table. Like, I mean, you guys have seen and know so much from what's on the ground, and this is unique in the space that we're in and the implementation. We're all going to kind of weed through this together. So again, I'd be happy with a list of issues and problems. Like, I'm interested in that just as much as I am the recommendations.
Wonderful. And I think that this, few minutes here, Holly, it's good to raise these questions, helps us then get in the right position for, our final meetings. I know that it's easy and we get into the weeds, we see the reports, we see the data, and, backpacks or ballet shoes, that became a real nice headline last time. And I think those are important discussions, but also to kind of raise us back up, what's our charge here? We're not going to solve every issue, but we can move forward. I think Amy's got a question or two here, and then if we've got any final questions for the senator, we're about halfway through, and we want to make sure that we've got time to get into the rest. So, Amy.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. I do have some questions that parents have asked me real quick. If I can ask you, I'll go through it real quick. Okay. In-state, out of state. And I was thinking back to session and the Senate and the House Ed committees and the administrative rules. And the one that was rejected was the out-of-state college or university. And so I'm wondering, did you really want this money to be spent on out-of-state camps or whatever it may be. I just wanted to ask how you feel.
Absolutely, in-state students only. We also did not envision it on things that would be happening outside of our state unless they were virtual.
Okay, thank you. The other thing, I've had quite a few people contact me about their concerns with caps, whether it be vendors asking for a lot of money, say for example, for swim lessons, or another one was, can they spend $500 on Air Jordans?
We didn't have a specific cap on expenditures, but we had a piece of legislation that was introduced last year that to make some changes to the statute that didn't make it all the way through the process, that addressed what was being charged on the platform. And this is maybe not a direct answer to your question, but maybe related. So we also didn't want to see vendors jacking up their prices on the platform, where if a parent could go to Office Depot and get something way cheaper there, but now we're not doing, receipt reimbursement. So we had some language, and so we have that at the ready. I don't have it handy with me now, but we had that drafted and at the ready last year to put a restriction on vendors for what they could charge. They couldn't charge above a market rate or something that you would normally just find in the store on the platform. As it relates to something like Air Jordans, I would say that was not something that had come up. So I think that's something I would be interested in hearing, what do you as a parent panel think is reasonable? Is that something we need to consider putting in the statute? I would say that was not something we had envisioned or talked about. And so like myself as a parent, I'm like, well, I'm not going to spend that kind of money on my kids' shoes. And so I don't think the taxpayers should either. So, but I'm curious what you as a collective group of parents, like if that's something we need to build in again, as we refine the program. I'm interested in your feedback.
Okay, thank you. I knew I assumed that's how you would feel about that too. And we don't want the taxpayers, right? We don't want them paying for that. The other thing we've discussed is, and we talking to Odyssey about this, was, is it possible for parents to request a vendor? Is that something that we could look into? I don't know, but we've had that discussion. So I just wanted to share that with you. Okay. So myself as a parent, could I say I really would like to have this business? Must I wait for the business to do it? Can I put it in? So it's something we've had the discussion about.
I love that idea. Functionally, I'm not sure how that works with the vendor, but I think that's another area where we need to capture some information that maybe we're not capturing. So if a parent went on and was like, oh, I was hoping to use my funds, with this provider, and they're not on there, is there a way for me to say, alert the vendor to say, I have funds, because the vendor may not be aware of the program or how to get on and that kind of thing. So functionally, and maybe Matt or Heather, you have some ideas around this, but that could be another portion where maybe we can capture the data to figure out, what that might look like, both with the state board and with the vendor.
Heather, I believe you've shared with us that there is a process. Now, we may not love what the process is, but I believe there is a way to do that. And that maybe could be a recommendation from this group, is to simplify, clarify, I don't know, add some sort of clarifying words to what the process is. Heather?
Yeah, currently people can reach out to me and I can direct the vendors to Odyssey and to the link on the site so they can fill that out. But I have been talking to Odyssey specifically about this recently, and they're developing a parent newsletter, which would include a highlight on how to go ahead and do that. So it kind of removes me or them as the middleman. Okay. And then it also they're talking about highlighting new vendors that are on the marketplace and just getting a lot more proactive communicating with parents about what's going on. So it is in the process and it has been identified. We did send out that survey to parents that haven't been using their money. and to
Oh,
really get
good.
a sense on what's going on. And some of that came back. So we've been talking about how we can improve a lot of processes.
Excellent.
Matt, Raymond?
Oh, Senator, just really quick, you had mentioned in the in-state, out-of-state. This is just a heads up for you, or maybe a reminder. I think I talked to you about before, but we did have several families who are border towns. They actually reside outside the state, but their students attend school in state. And so the way we interpreted it is they were eligible for those funds. So if you want to clarify that, that's the way we're currently interpreting it.
And I think that's something that I'd be interested, and we have several of those border communities, I think on all corners of the state. Is that right, Matt?
Yep, that's correct.
Just about everywhere where we have students who attend Idaho schools. So I think that's something, again, I'd be interested. Who knows what could get through the legislative process, that caveat, but I'd be interested in what you as parents, kind of what your natural reaction to something like that is. Again, remembering that, as we move forward, these are state tax dollars. The first iterations were federal funds that we were using. But as we move forward, these are Idaho state taxpayer dollars going to this program. So, if we need to clarify or modify eligibility requirements, I think that's also something we're open to.
Thank you. Amy wanted to share a statistic and
Yeah.
I just wanted to calculate the wave one, we were talking about the percentage of students. And I just did that math, and Heather may be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but I had about 72.4% in the wave one students.
The first, and that's good.
I just took that 35,772 out of the 49,429, Heather. I think that's about.
We're gonna trust you.
So
Yeah.
a little over
That's-
72%. I mean, so I don't know what your intent was, but I think that's
great.
You are, Senator, you are more than welcome. You do not have to stay on, but you are welcome to stay on to hear. We've got a few more items in this. Put it all out there, and here's some things we wanted to talk about in between the meetings that we're going around. I believe that, I think we'll be over in Eastern Idaho next week, next Wednesday. In fact, some by Zoom, some in person. Thursday, pardon me. And now that we're to a point of, as you said, we've raised a lot of questions.
Yep.
And now we want to get to a position where we can say, what are our thoughts? Let's start discussing some of these things. And so for the panel, at our last meeting, as we looked at the wording and the language in the bill and in the law, the two words that stuck out group were educational and at risk. And so we talked about getting some definitions, not that we would necessarily include those in the code section, but perhaps as guiding posts for us as we consider the next item of categories. Allison, Courtney, I know you were gonna do some research for us on this as well, and Allison found some information for us related to at-risk. It's always nice if you can anchor it to something that's already existing besides Webster. And I believe in the materials that you got, if you look in 33-1001, is that?
I don't believe they have the statute, but I can
Oh,
pull it,
okay.
I can share it.
Okay, we can pull something up, but at-risk is defined. And there are a number of, we'll get it on your screens that we can talk about. And as we're pulling that up, educational was more challenging. We didn't see that defined specifically in any state board of ed policy or statute. I don't know if there are legal definitions. I mean, I think a lot of it is going to be sort of subjective, but Courtney, maybe you have found some things. Why don't we start with just what Allison's got up on the screen for at-risk. And this is very specific. I'm not really gonna ask for questions on it. I mean, it is what it is. And so, you can kind of get a look at that. Courtney, I'm gonna toss over to you. And it doesn't have to be just at risk. And knowing you have experience at an alternative high school, you may have an additional perspective to this or the educational definition.
So I did a lot of research into what's coming out in the literature with regards to how to help kids overcome their learning loss in COVID. And one of the things that really was spotlighted was that direct instruction piece, that tutoring services with regards especially to math and language arts has really been what a lot of people have seen as beneficial. And that was something that was concerning to me as I looked over the vendor opportunities. There really wasn't any of that available, with limited in the Ada County area for families. So if we're really trying to address the COVID learning loss, we're kind of getting off target, I think, to some degree with regards to what vendors are actually on the platform, because we're not giving direct intervention methods and availability of services to address learning loss. We're enhancing learning opportunities with a lot of our vendors, but a lot of those haven't really been linked directly. Like I couldn't find, any literature that spoke to the benefits of Taekwondo with regards to academic achievement. I mean, there's theoretical ideas out there that as you engage a student in the academic community, they certainly are going to be more apt to be a part of the community. So things like sports and cheerleading and things of those natures certainly are beneficial academically to a student's success. But I don't know, that's something that is plaguing me, because I don't know if that really, we can draw a direct link between some extracurricular activities enhancing academic achievement. And if that really is the modus and the motivation behind this, I don't know. Speaking to the senator's language, she wanted it to be really available for parents to access opportunities. But then she spoke to the fiscal responsibility we have to the taxpayers. The fact that we don't have any school districts that are providing direct services for academic lags is troublesome to me. If that's really what the purpose of this is, I don't know. So those are some things that I have found and have been kind of rattling around in my own mind and heart, is what is the purpose of this? If it really is to improve academic achievement and to ensure that we help kids overcome those learning losses, then we really need to beef up what the vendors are offering and steer clear more of what people have been purchasing, which is, of course, the technology components, and really provide some direct services on the ground in these local communities to help these at-risk students really become academically proficient.
It sounds like a lot of what Marcy is stepping up to provide, and what Jason explained to us earlier. I appreciate that the end part of your comments really did go to how we take what we're looking at and understanding, and how do we put that into a recommendation form. And in hearing you talk about it, providing more direct instruction opportunities, those are things that we can recommend. And obviously there's a process that we don't need to worry. What does that look like communication wise to the districts? How do we support, this, that, or the other? Less about the implementation on the panel side, and more about here's the direction that you want to set. Here's the tone that we want to set with the program. And then those who are charged with implementation, they create the objectives to reach those goals. Other thoughts as we look, and has anything changed in your mind? I guess I'll ask the panel, looking at, educational, or Laura?
Hi, I looked and found the educational research that I had been thinking of during our last meeting around, I guess it's officially called visible learning research, but it looked at different instructional strategies, but also just like extracurricular and other factors for student achievement and the impact that has on their education. And similar, the direct instruction is a huge one, but it talked a lot, or there was quite a few studies that talked a lot about that extracurricular pieces and those kinds of things, like we've been talking about, and how those, like the data behind how that is impacting students. It's not a huge impact size because, of course, what's happening in classrooms is where the bigger impact sizes are, but there is a correlation in a positive impact on students with those extracurricular activities and after school programs and those kinds of tutoring opportunities for sure. So I think helping guide that way to have more offerings throughout the state, even if it's like connecting rural communities virtually for tutoring and those kinds of things, would be great. I did notice with that at-risk definition too, it like very clearly works towards like the high school end of things a little bit, where at the elementary level, we're like a lot of the at-risk has to do with like the family needs, and are they on assistance? Is their family transient and moving super often? Are they lower income? The income of like the education level of the family and those kinds of things also contribute to students being at risk at the elementary level more than like their GPA and those kinds of things.
Thank you, Laura. I just as a reminder, thinking back to why we were wanting to provide these definitions, as we're going to move into a discussion about the categories of what we believe would be eligible and ineligible. And the group last time wanted to focus in on the language of the law, which was for, to improve, I can't remember exactly, but we know it said educational and at risk. And so we wanted to have those at the beginning, at the front of your minds as we go into this discussion on the categories and have that as a lens. And I with the hopes that will make it a little bit easier to make some recommendations that way. Courtney?
The one other thing that I wanted to point out is we had that robust discussion about the backpack reimbursement. And based on what she was saying is, when she referenced the 529 plans, the use of the funds is very broad. Anything that can support academic achievement is something that they embraced as being worthy of reimbursement. Certainly, those basic needs to be a functioning student, I think, is something that would certainly qualify. So I think that needs to be expanded, that understanding of what is required for some of these students to really be functioning students.
Thank you. And I wrote that down too, basic needs of functioning students. Holly.
Asked Superintendent, you asked us if our minds had changed or if anything had changed. And for me, the last discussion was really eye-opening because I think we spent way too much time on whether things should or shouldn't be approved, especially as the senator just noted that she didn't envision that as part of our role to do a backwards look. So what's changed for me is that I feel like we should not be having that discussion. Instead, we should have a report from the department that says, here are the things that were not approved. And then we can make recommendations from those categories and say, do we think those things should be approved moving forward? So that's what's changed for me. I love this research that Courtney and Laura have just talked about. I think if we start making an actual report and having a discussion about what we can put in that report, that'd be really helpful, like increasing access to vendors, and we make a recommendation that the board, market to them in a certain way, or that we're really actually starting to formulate recommendations. I think that would be the most productive use of our time.
Thank you so much. I'll go to Jason next, and then Barb. I just want to say one thing for Holly. With respect to looking back, the only looking back component for the panel in statute, it does say that this group has to identify a process for appeals. And so that would be my only recommendation, that, for looking back to see what has been previously denied, what's been the process. One of the things that I wrote down from last time that this this group was moving on was if you are denied your expenditure, that you're completely kicked out of the program forever and ever, and that wasn't how this group felt about it. And so as we look to recommend an appeals process moving forward, we can look at some of the elements, that were already included and say yay or nay to those. But I agree, we're ready to get going on recommendations. Jason.
Thank you. I agree with Holly and yourself, Madam Superintendent. I think that recommendations are where this panel needs to lead forward. But if a small rural town, which doesn't have any school or any outside school activities or some tutoring opportunities, can't get their students to a certified teacher, then we need to look at that recommendation as a major change.
Including transportation costs, is that what I'm hearing you say?
I think I wouldn't say transportation costs because, well, I think that when you start transporting and figuring mileage, then that's a whole different element of research and time. But if you have fees to where even as little as FFA fees, and your students that are underprivileged can't access the money to use for that, and that's an outside school and inside school activity, then that seems to be kind of a line that we need to move.
Okay, thank you. Barb?
Hi, thanks. This has been a great discussion today. I think everyone's made some great points. And I think I just wanted to touch on some of the questions I asked. Is what has really sat with me since the last meeting, just based on some questions I've seen and that type of stuff, is just really also not making sure that we are being really good stewards of the taxpayer monies too. And I know everyone's talked about that. And although I want to I think it's very important that we make sure that the opportunities are available. And I think so much of what Courtney said is so right on. But just to keep in mind the cost, because sometimes there's a lot of opportunities for waste. If that makes any sense, I could go into examples, but what's really been weighing on me since the last one is just to make sure we're really fiscally responsible with the taxpayers' monies and how it's being spent.
Thank you. Joni.
Can you tell me what the grant is this year? What's our total money to be spent?
30 million.
And I guess it seems like I've been looking into the Facebook group a lot and talking to a couple of recipients of the grant. It seems like everything's kind of put on hold right now, or things have become more difficult to use through Odyssey. Do we have any input on that? Or
I know that a request of the panel, the short answer is no. As a reminder, we were going to discuss or talk with the vendor at our meeting next week, and we've asked them to be available so that we could go through some of these questions. Would that be helpful, Joni?
Yeah, I can hold all my questions for them.
Only because we don't, other than Heather, who is not the vendor, she facilitates. I hate to put anybody on the spot to speak for them.
Well, I could maybe address it slightly. I mean, we have put in a lot more guardrails or safeguards to make sure that items that are being purchased are falling within those eligible expenses as defined in the statute, as we've been interpreting up to this point, right? So I think maybe I don't know, I haven't heard specifically from parents that they're frustrated, but maybe it's taking, maybe a bit longer to get something processed. And I can go back to Odyssey and see if they can look into if their processing times are longer. I don't know if that helps, Joni.
Okay, and I mean, I lost my question, but yeah, I've heard that like they could have their stuff on wait or hold for up to 2 weeks, and then the prices are bumped, and so they're not, I don't feel like they're being served to the best of their ability, because we're forcing them to use this vendor versus they can't go out and get the best bang for their buck and then get reimbursed, I guess. And so I feel like there's a lot of frustration there. I feel like that's not us being the best stewards of the money when the vendors are price hiking on them and they're not getting their stuff in a timely manner, or things are just not available anymore. And so I guess that's all concerning to me. I have had a few people reach out and they say that they're being required to prove that their past purchases were eligible. Is that correct?
We have reached out to people that we have flagged items as not approved, expenses, and requested additional documentation and reasoning as to why they feel that they were an eligible expense. Maybe they had like the IEP paperwork or curriculum to support the purchase. And then once we gave parents 30 days to submit that. And then once we go through and determine what's eligible and not eligible, we'll notify the parents, the
And
state
so
board.
it's for purchases that are still on hold, they're waiting to get, or is this purchases that have already happened?
These are purchases that already happened.
And so if it was already approved once, I mean, what is the repercussion then if we decide that it's not approved? We're gonna pull their chance to ever apply again. We're gonna make them pay the money back. I feel like it was already approved.
So these are items that were not approved and they were purchased. And maybe this is a good time. I don't know if we want to talk about that process, about how a parent.
Yeah, yes, well, not yet.
Okay.
Only because we do want to talk about the appeals process. I just, before we get there, there's two things, and just looking at our time, and using our new parameters of having this panel look at things from the high level, not how will it actually get implemented. And Barb, I will get to you. Sorry, I just noticed your hand.
Oh.
I want to just ask a yes or no question of the panel. You can use the icon on Zoom or do a thumbs up or thumbs down. For reimbursements, to me, for this panel, this is a yes or no. If you're interested in having reimbursements be a part of be a recommendation or not, how that gets worked out, that could get figured out, but that came up in our last meeting. So I would just ask, is this group interested, as we make our list of recommendations, having reimbursements be a recommendation? So thank you, Holly. If you have your icon, okay.
So we're talking going back to how it was prior.
Right, this is for moving forward, the program that we're creating. All right, so we've got 1, 2, 3, and 1 that way. And Courtney, if you weighed in, I didn't see it, I'm sorry. Oh, and I think you're on mute.
Yes.
Okay, and Joni, did you have an opinion on reimbursements moving forward?
I was a thumbs up.
Thank you. Okay, all right. I'm going to skip back to categories. I think that we agree that the broad categories as stated in the statute are broad enough that it's intended to catch all sorts of things. I've picked up on some others that may have been missed as strict definitions. Thinking about categories of things, not specific items, knowing that we're trying to create more direct instruction opportunities and support. Are there specific categories that you feel that should be called out in a different, better, more emphasized way?
Other than these 6.
Other than the 6 that are there. Holly?
We had that discussion about services, and I think that could be more clear. So, but again, I think that our purpose is just to make recommendations, not to craft the legislation for them. So I would, instead of saying, I think we should change it to this, I would say that the legislature should consider the category of service more clearly define that, how they see fit.
Okay,
And
thank you. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
no, that's no problem.
Jason?
I agree. I think that we should have a category or recommend a category that is just technology, so we can see how much is actually being spent on computers and printers and such.
Barb, thank you.
Thank you. One of the things that we talked about last time is classes and camps. And I know there was some stuff about curriculum, and I might be wrong, educational programs offered for a fee, but we already thought that. So something I think just to address classes and camps, because I think that really addresses many of the issues that Courtney brought up in terms of additional educational opportunities that aren't available in the class, but are educational.
Okay, classes and camps, thank you. Amy?
And if I can add on to Barb's, in-state, I think is really important.
Okay.
If we're going to follow what the House and the Senate Education Committees
All right.
have been doing. I would like to see the tutoring piece, so being able to include those educators, and maybe not educators. There are very strong tutors that are not certified educators. I don't know what that looks like, but.
Well, we know there are professional tutoring services that
Right.
may or may not have a certified teacher there, but.
Right.
Okay.
Also to include those co-op fees, and I was looking at the Secretary of State's website, and it looks like those are registered under 501c3s. Of course, I didn't look up all of them, but the ones I did look up, that's how they were registered. In addition to that, the 501c3s, I don't know if that's what a private school entity is under. I didn't look, but they would have to separate, like the senator talked about, for their sports and their fees
Okay,
and their classes.
so private and public school fees.
Right. And I don't know if that could fall under one of these categories as is already.
Well, and we'll do a little work for all of you before the next meeting to capture, what you've put out, and then we'll start to react to what recommendations would look like, and you can say, well, maybe that's too specific, maybe that's not specific enough. We can.
Right, but recommend just to expand that,
Okay,
to
expand.
include those categories.
Okay. Only fees, transportation costs.
I've heard that from them before. That's why I was looking and I asked if that was there. I read through the legislation real quick. I thought it was in there, but it isn't. But I've heard them discuss it in the past.
It was thrown out, it was thrown out by the group, but we talked about tuition. Is that on the table for this group at all for discussion? We're not making the final list. This is broad categories. Courtney?
So one thing, this isn't a line item, but I think school districts and universities just automatically have to be on the vendor platform. Like, I don't see why we have to ask those institutions to do an additional step. They should just be automatically there. And then they can add their services if they choose to, but they should just be there.
Okay, thank you.
Simple recommendation amendment.
Yeah.
I'd like to see transportation and tuition on the list.
Thank you, Joni. All right. And we may. The noises in the room. Sorry. Okay.
What was that piece of legislation you read? Matt, I'm sorry.
All right.
33, 10, or 10.
Well, this is a great list. And so we'll work to have something put together for our next meeting where we can have some discussion items on this. We do want to, as again, part of our charge with the group is to come up with an appeals process. Again, recommendations for changes that can be made. How would we structure that? Matt Freeman and his team identified actually two, are they conflicting? They're not really conflicting, they just don't hold hands nicely or something. I'm gonna let Matt describe and explain what they found.
Yeah, just the first slide and I'll explain. So there's just in two different sections of the Empowering Parents Code, there are different appeals pathways. So under 33.10.32.5, if you have a parent who used their funds to purchase an ineligible product or service, and that's the panel has determined that, or excuse me, yeah, if it's determined that if the parent has purchased an ineligible product, the parent can appeal that decision to the panel, and the panel will then make a recommendation to the state board.
I think that sorry, I don't mean to talk over you, Matt, but
go ahead.
Because I was in Jennifer's office for quite some time this morning talking this through, and she kind of, so the parent is notified that they made that ineligible purchase, correct? And they can appeal that to the EPAP, to you guys, and then they would meet to consider whether the item is an ineligible or eligible expense, correct? And then they are notified based on that determination whether or not they would be barred. And then once they are barred, then that parent can take it to the board. Because I was kind of misconstruing the process that, it went directly on to the board, but no, it would be up to the parent to take that issue of being barred to the board. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's correct. That's my understanding.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
So
I've talked this through several times. Okay.
Yeah, so it only would go, you would only appeal, a parent could only appeal directly to the state board if a determination had been that they were barred from participating in the program. It's only that decision that can be appealed to the state board.
Oh, not the actual expenditure.
Not the actual expenditure. Okay. Yeah, only that they're barred from the program.
Okay.
So they're not in conflict. It's just a little clunky.
Clunky, that's a better word. Okay. So again, thinking broadly about a process, what elements would this panel like to see involved in a process? Knowing we don't have to build the entire plane today, and we can come back with the pieces and present it and say, yes, we like this, or we've missed something. Starting with if an expenditure has been denied, I heard from this group several times that should not preclude you from being able to participate another time. What other pieces would you like to see, or elements of an appeals process?
Well, I think that there are some appeals that we've received from parents. Just wondering at what point we will address those. Do we know?
No, I don't know, Matt, is there a timeline? Is this group charged in statute to go also have like a retroactive look So do we recommend an appeals process and then use that process to go back?
It's my understanding that that the EPAP only is looking at the educational items or services that were bought that have been flagged or determined to be not eligible. I don't know, another instance, maybe you could give us an example of what you're talking about of.
I think that's what we are talking about. The ones that got flagged. Allison?
But nothing, there hasn't been a determination on those items as of.
Yeah, we have not notified any parents that they have been like in that process. That process has not started yet for these items yet.
Okay, well, there's your answer, Holly, for that. It hasn't been started. I guess the other part of her question is are we determined, does this group determine what will happen for last year's stuff based on a process we create now?
That's my understanding. Isn't that yours, Heather?
That they will be going, I feel like that we have asked that they make recommendations to these additional categories, and that would maybe clear up some of the questions on some of these items that were historical. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So if you guys are like,
Jennifer, we can get an official DAG opinion on that, Holly, because it is an important question.
Yeah, I'm just concerned about our process. Like, to me, the appeals process is pretty clear. I don't really read it the same way that has been described here. I think it's like if the board denies this parent's request, then they can come to us and appeal that decision. And I think there are instances where parents have done that, like a gal that wanted her kid to go to debate camp, and we haven't had the opportunity to discuss that. I wrote a letter to all the members and said, I'd love to discuss this. We haven't been able to do that. So I just wondered, I mean, to me, the process is clear. So I'm not sure what we're being asked to do is if we're changing the statute, or I'm just under the impression that we would be reviewing those letters from parents.
And we will need to do that. You are correct.
And I think parents, Holly, speaking to that, whatever the communication is, whether it's true or false, I believe that parents and the letters they're writing us are under the same interpretation as well. And I believe the legislation reads that way as well. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And so whether they have been denied yet or not, I believe that they believe, it seems to me that they believe as well, that it is our determination we're supposed to be sitting down with them, hearing from them, and making a determination. So whether they have been denied yet or not, I don't know, but I do feel like we're kind of leaving them hanging in a way.
Yes.
I feel like I should be doing something, and I feel like that's what you're saying.
Yes. Yeah, so
I know, that's not your intent at all.
And we will, let's get it clarified, which we can do in 5 minutes. I mean, we'll do it after this meeting. And when we meet next week, so our agenda can focus on the appeals and the process by which all of you want to hear, see, so that parents who have applied, can have an opportunity.
I know that's nobody's intent. Maybe if there's a way for us to communicate to them that this is new for all of us, like we've just begun, we've had 2 main meetings. So we're all learning, we're getting this plan developed. We're not ignoring them. We really are developing a plan.
And I also want to just, like, the statute, I think, is pretty clear that you guys are receiving the appeals once a parent has been considered to purchase something that's not eligible. So the woman with the instance with the camp, now she never purchased that item, right? Because it wasn't allowed on the platform. She wanted to send her child to the Gonzaga camp. I think I know what we're talking about. So that hasn't even happened. So that's not a official appeal under the the statute. That's more of like, you guys are hearing from the parents as a panel. We keep hearing this. Camps need to be included. Well, then we want to make that recommendation as a category to allow for it. And I that's how I see it in my mind. I don't know if that's correct or incorrect, but it's like you're taking the feedback from the parents.
I think they just want us to help them, and it's not really something under our that we are supposed to be doing, right? It's not our role. But
yeah.
Anyway.
Essentially, we're just slicing it a different way, and the parent is trying to say, I feel like this was denied because I wanted it to be covered. It wasn't. And by the definitions of how the program is being implemented, it wasn't really denied. But still, to the parent, it's not covered. So it's denied to them.
Right.
So then, quote unquote, appealing to us. And really, what I feel like is the board is asking us to make recommendations on things that we're waiting for them to make decisions on so that we can follow our statutory obligation. So if you really did deny them and say, sorry, this camp was denied, then we could, essentially be the appeals process. But what I'm hearing Heather say is it isn't appealable because it wasn't actually denied by the definitions. And that makes sense, but I think we just need to clarify the process to parents so that they can say to us, hey, we want this to be approved.
We can do that. Thank you. Thank you.
That makes
sense. And that is fair.
Right.
So there is the Idaho School for the Deaf and Blind is having a meeting in here in just a few minutes. And so we're gonna wrap up. Thank you all, first of all, for making time middle of the day to go through this. I think we've made some really important strides as we get to the next meeting, really targeting in on where do we want to have those recommendations land as far as broad categories. What are some recommendations on process? What are recommendations as far as vendor support and access? And I think the one that we can really take some more time and we'll understand, is it communication to a parent or was something really denied? What is the appeals process? So next meeting, appeals and vendor questions, specific vendor questions, and then taking a look at a rough draft of possible recommendations to the board. Have I missed anything?
Madam Chair, could we submit agenda items so that we can all kind of get our things at least on the, and if we don't get to them, then we'll have to move it to the next meeting, but that way we can.
Yeah, please send. Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Awesome. That'd be great. Thank you.
I think it's great. And just so parents know, we're all working together to try to get this all worked out for the best for the parents and the students and the taxpayers.
Well, yeah, and the administration of the program. We want to make it nice and seamless. So, all right, with that, we will conclude and again offer a thank you. And we will see you either in person or virtually next Thursday in Rexford, Madison High School. School district. Yes. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks. You did research too. Thank you.